The carriage was already moving when Eliza Ashworth realized she had left her gloves on the hallway table. She pressed her bare fingers together in her lap and said nothing. Beside her, her cousin Cecily was adjusting the pearl at her throat, tilting her chin toward the window as though the city owed her its full attention. Cecily's mother, Aunt Dorothea, sat across from them both with her hands folded and her mouth arranged into a smile that had very little to do with happiness. "You must not hover tonight," Dorothea said, and it took Eliza a moment to understand she was the one being addressed. "Last season you planted yourself by the windows all evening, and looked as though you were waiting for a coach to carry you home. It put the other guests off." "I was waiting for a coach to carry me home," Eliza said. Dorothea's smile tightened at the corners. "Yes, well." Cecily laughed, soft and bright and entirely without cruelty, which was almost worse. "You are funny, Eliza. That is genuinely your best quality. You should try to lead with it tonight." Eliza looked out her own window. London, in the evening light, looked like London at all other hours, only the shadows were longer, and the smoke moved differently. She had grown up 15 miles outside the city, and had never entirely stopped finding it loud. The Pemberton Ball was held in a house on Grosvenor Square that had so many candles burning in the entrance hall that the heat met them on the steps before they reached the door. Cecily walked inside like she was returning to somewhere she belonged. Eliza followed like a woman who had misread the address. The first half hour passed the way most first half hours at these things passed. Cecily collected men the way certain flowers collect insects, not by reaching for them, but by simply existing in a particular frequency. Eliza stood at a slight remove and watched it happen with the detached interest of someone who had long ago filed this process under things that did not apply to her. She had been 19 the last time she had stood in a room like this and believed it might go differently. That was 4 years ago. She did not think of it as defeat. She had simply reorganized her expectations around more reliable foundations. She liked books. She liked rain. She liked the particular quiet of early mornings before the house woke up, when she could sit in the kitchen with a cup of tea that was too hot and read without anyone needing her to be anything. She had built a small, careful life around the things she could count on. She was good at counting. There were 43 candles in the chandelier above her. She had started at the outer ring and worked inward. It was the kind of thing she did when a room felt too large and too loud, and her own body felt slightly too present inside it. The counting was not superstition. It was not a wish. It was just a thing to do with her attention when her attention had nowhere better to be. She was on 31 when Cecily's voice lifted above the general murmur close enough to reach her. She did not catch all of it. She caught enough. "Send the plain one away." And then the laugh. The particular laugh Cecily had that was so natural and unguarded it almost made the words that came before it forgivable. Almost. Eliza went back to the candles. 32. 33. A man nearby cleared his throat. He was speaking to someone else. 34. Somewhere across the room, a glass was set down on a tray too hard and rang out once, clearly, like a small bell marking the end of something. 35. The heat from the candles was considerable. Her neck was warm. She thought about the gloves on the hallway table at home and whether she could have made some reasonable excuse to stay behind, and then she thought that even if she had tried, Dorothea would have found a reason to bring her anyway, because bringing Eliza along was a way of making Cecily look brighter by comparison, and Dorothea was meticulous about anything that made Cecily look brighter. She understood this without bitterness. It was simply the arithmetic of the situation. 36. She stopped counting. Someone had crossed the room and was standing beside her. Not the soft, tentative arrival of a man building courage. Not the bustling arrival of a woman looking for her companion. This was purposeful. This was a man who walked the way some men walk, as if the floor agreed with him. She did not look up immediately. She finished the thought she was in the middle of, which was the thought about the gloves, and then she looked. He was tall in the particular way that is less about height and more about the way a person occupies space, as if the space had been anticipating him. Dark coat, good posture, a face that had apparently decided on serious and then made occasional small concessions toward something warmer. He was looking at the chandelier. "What number are you on?" he said. She stared at him. "I watched you from across the room," he said, not explaining this at all as if it required no explanation. "You have been counting the candles. I want to know how many." 36, Eliza said. It came out before she had decided to answer. "I had it at 38, he said. "I may have miscounted the inner ring. You missed 2 near the east side. They are set close together." He looked at the east side of the chandelier with genuine interest, as though this were important information. "You are right. 36. He turned his attention from the candles to her. "I am James Wren." She knew the name. Everyone in the room knew the name. She had never spent much time thinking about it. He was the Duke of Calloway, which was the kind of title that people said in a particular tone of voice, as if the two words together were a weather event. Eliza Ashworth, she said. Miss Ashworth. He said her name as if trying its weight. Would you dance with me? The reasonable answer was yes, because this was a ball and he was asking, and the social machinery of the evening would run more smoothly if she said yes. But something in the simplicity of the question startled her, the plain way he asked it, without preamble or performance, as if the asking itself were a perfectly ordinary thing and the answer were entirely up to her. I would, she said. He offered his arm. She took it. The room noticed before she did. She would remember this later, standing in her bedroom with her hair down and the city quiet outside the window, not the dancing, which was perfectly adequate, and not his hand at her back, which was correct and proper and unremarkable, but the specific quality of his attention. He had looked at her as if she were a sentence he was reading carefully, not a picture, a sentence. Cecily's voice reached her from across the floor at one point, something light and social, directed at someone else entirely. Eliza did not turn to look. She thought about the 36 candles. She thought about the fact that across a crowded room, in a house full of women made specifically to be seen, a man had watched her count. She did not yet know what to do with that. She went home with one unanswered question, sitting quietly in the back of her mind like a book she had not yet opened, and she set it on the shelf beside her careful life, and she went to sleep. She woke up before the house did, made her tea too hot, and sat in the kitchen. She did not open the book. Not yet. But she knew it was there. 3 days later he called. Dorothea received the news with an expression that moved through 6 distinct states in under 2 seconds, before settling on something that looked remarkably like a woman trying to appear calm while internally rearranging all her furniture. The Duke of Calloway, she said, for the 4th time, to no one in particular. She was standing in the drawing-room doorway with a small card in her hand, calling on Eliza. Cecily, who was on the chaise with a novel she was not reading, looked up with an expression Eliza did not examine too closely. Eliza set down her own book and straightened her dress. He was shown in 5 minutes later. He had brought nothing. No flowers, no fruit, no carefully chosen confectionery. He had brought himself, and a question he apparently had not been able to stop thinking about. There is a book, he said, after the initial courtesies had been observed, on your side table. I noticed it when I came in. I have read it. Eliza looked at the book. It was a dense, slightly unfashionable history of the Byzantine court that she had found in her father's library, and borrowed without asking because her father had not opened it in 11 years. What did you think of it? She said. I think the author is wrong about the succession, he said, but right about almost everything else. I think he is wrong about the succession, and wrong about the northern campaigns, Eliza said, but the primary sources he cites in the 4th chapter are genuinely remarkable. He looked at her. You have read the primary sources, he said. My father has a reasonable library, she said, and I have had considerable time. She did not explain what she meant by that. He did not ask her to. He simply absorbed it and went on. They talked for 40 minutes. Dorothea entered the room twice on transparent pretexts, and both times Eliza watched her take in the scene, the two of them leaning slightly toward each other over a question about the fall of Constantinople, and both times Dorothea retreated with an expression that had gone very quiet and very calculating, which meant she was doing arithmetic of her own. Cecily did not come in at all. When Calloway stood to leave, he paused at the door. Would you walk in the park tomorrow, Miss Ashworth? I find I have more questions than this visit has answered. What sort of questions? She said. The kind that require more than 40 minutes, he said. She said yes. She thought about it afterward, standing at the window watching the street, the particular feeling of a conversation that had not run out before the time did. Most conversations ran out. She had sat through hundreds of them, the polite half-sentences about weather, about the season, about Cecily's hair, about nothing, about the careful management of silence so it did not become noticeable. He had talked to her about the fall of an empire and wanted to know her opinion, and when she had given it, he had pushed back. Not to be contrary, because he meant it. That was not nothing. She was still at the window when Dorothea appeared behind her. Well, Dorothea said. Yes, Eliza said. He is very focused, Dorothea said, with the particular inflection of a woman who is saying one thing and thinking several others. Yes, Eliza said again. Dorothea was quiet for a moment. Then, you mustn't read too much into a single call, dear. Men like Calloway have complicated reasons for the things they do. Social reasons. Reasons that do not necessarily. I am going to walk with him tomorrow, Eliza said. The sentence came out flat and clean, and left no particular room for negotiation. Dorothea made a small sound in her throat and left. Eliza stayed at the window. The park the following afternoon was full of the usual arrangement of people performing their leisure in the afternoon light. Children with hoops, elderly men with the slightly glazed expression of men who have been told by their doctors to walk. Couples moving at the precise socially acceptable distance from each other that communicated interest without declaration. Calloway walked beside her and said very little for the first several minutes, which she found unexpectedly comfortable. Most men filled silence as though it were a problem to be solved. He wore it like a coat. Then he said, "Why were you counting the candles?" She considered the question. It was a strange question to still be asking, 3 days after the fact, which meant he had been thinking about it. She was not sure how she felt about being the thing someone had been thinking about. "Because the room was too large," she said, "and I needed something exact." He nodded slowly. "You were not waiting to be asked to dance." "No." "You were not performing." "No." "You were just," he said, and paused. "Present, inside your own head, inside the room at the same time." She looked at a pigeon that was walking with considerable purpose toward a bread crust. "I am not sure that is a virtue. I have spent 11 years attending things like last Thursday's ball," he said. "I have watched a very large number of people perform their interest in being there. The exhaustion of it is," he looked for the word, "cumulative." She glanced at him. His jaw was set in the particular way of someone who is being honest about something they do not usually discuss. "You were counting candles," he said. "I found it." Another pause. "Restoring." She almost laughed, not from amusement, from the strangeness of being called restoring. She had been called quiet, which people usually meant as a polite word for something else. She had been called bookish, which was accurate. She had been called sensible and steady, and she had understood from the way people said those words that they were not compliments so much as consolation prizes. Restoring was not a word that had been used in her direction before. "You are looking at me," he said, "as though I have said something suspect." "I am looking at you," she said, "as though I am trying to decide whether you mean it." "I mean it," he said, simply, without performance. She looked back at the pigeon, which had reached the bread crust and was now attacking it with single-minded commitment. "I have not," she said carefully, "had a great deal of practice at being meant." She had not intended to say that. It came out before she could organize it back into silence where it belonged. He was quiet beside her for a moment. "No," he said, "I suspect not." He did not explain that. He did not offer her a tidy reassurance or pivot to something easier. He simply walked beside her with the thing she had said sitting between them, unpapered over, and she found, to her considerable surprise, that this was the least lonely she had felt in several years. At the gate where they parted, he turned to her. "I would call again, if you would have me." "I would have you," she said, and then felt the color come into her face because the phrase had come out meaning more than she intended. He noticed. The corner of his mouth moved. "Thursday," he said. "Thursday," she said. She walked back to her aunt's house with her hands at her sides and a strange, light feeling in her chest that she did not yet know what to do with. It was the feeling of a window being opened in a room that had been closed for a long time. She noticed she was not counting anything. Cecily engineered the musicale with the kind of casual precision that Eliza had always secretly admired, the way a skilled player positions a chess piece as though it simply arrived there naturally, carried by the logic of the game rather than the hand. She selected a Tuesday. She wore the blue dress. She arranged to be standing beside the piano at the moment Calloway was shown in, her neck at the particular angle that the light from the tall window struck best. Eliza sat in the third row of chairs and watched the whole thing with the quiet interest of someone watching a performance they have seen the rehearsals for. He was polite. He was thorough. He said the things that good manners required about the program and the decoration, and the quality of the pianist, who was in fact genuinely excellent. Then he said, to Cecily, "Is Miss Ashworth here this evening?" Cecily's smile remained entirely intact. "She is. Somewhere about." "I see her," he said, and moved. He said it in the same tone a person uses to say, "I see the window," or "I see the door." It was not a slight directed at anyone. It was simply a man identifying where he needed to be and going there. Eliza looked up from her program. He sat down in the empty chair beside her and said, "The third movement of what they played last is interesting. Have you heard it before?" "Once," she said. "In a different arrangement. Better or worse?" "Differently sad," she said. He thought about that for a moment. "That is an exact thing to say. I like exact things, she said. I know, he said. The pianist began again. Cecily did not look at either of them for the remainder of the evening. Eliza knew this not because she was watching Cecily, but because in the corner of her attention she registered the deliberate absence of a gaze that had always, in rooms like these, been one of the primary points of navigation. When the evening ended and the guests were finding their wraps and exchanging their last pleasantries, Calloway paused beside her in the hall. Thursday, he said. Yes, she said. He left. Dorothea appeared at Eliza's shoulder with the quiet inevitability of a woman who has been waiting for an opportunity. He asked for you, she said. In front of everyone. Yes, Eliza said. Cecily is. Liza started. Cecily is fine, Eliza said. She is always fine. That is one of her gifts. She found her wrap and went to the carriage. She sat in the dark interior on the way home, and pressed her fingers together, and thought about the phrase differently sad. She had said it without thinking, the way she said most things that came out of her right, without rehearsal, without the editorial process she applied to the things she planned. She had learned to plan most things. It was safer. The unplanned things had a tendency to reveal more than she intended. But he had said it was exact. She turned the word over in her mind, the way you turn a stone over to look at the underside. Exact. She had spent most of her adult life being told, in various gentle and not-so-gentle ways, that she was too much of certain things and not enough of others. Too quiet, not animated enough, too particular, not charming enough in the particular mode that this particular world required charm to operate in. He kept finding words for the things she was that nobody else had bothered to look for words for. She did not know how to feel about that. She was afraid to feel too much about it. Fear, for Eliza, was not a thing that arrived with noise. It arrived quietly, like fog, and settled into the spaces between her bones, and the way she recognized it was the particular desire to make herself smaller, to draw in, to reduce the surface area that could be reached and therefore hurt. She knew this about herself the way you know the particular creak of a stair in your own house. It was just there. It was just how the structure worked. She pressed her fingers together and watched the streets of London pass in the window. Thursday was 3 days away. She did not allow herself to count them. Back at the house, Cecily was already upstairs. Eliza moved through the quiet rooms without lighting additional lamps. In the kitchen, she put the kettle on and waited, standing at the window that looked out onto the narrow back garden where nothing grew particularly well because the light was wrong. She had been standing in wrong light for a long time. She did not say this to herself as a sad thing. She said it the way you say a mathematical observation. It was simply true. The conditions had not been right. The conditions had changed, or were changing, and she was standing very still inside the change and trying to understand its dimensions before she moved. The kettle began to stir. She was thinking about Calloway's question in the park, not the one about the candles but the one that came after it, the quiet recognition in his voice when he said, "I suspect not." He had understood something without being told it. She was not entirely sure she knew what to do with a man who paid that quality of attention. The kettle sang. She made her tea too hot and held it in both hands and thought, Thursday. Just Thursday. One thing at a time. The visit she had not expected came on a Wednesday morning. Dorothea sent Cecily out on an errand. It was an errand that could have waited, or that could have been accomplished by the housekeeper, which meant it was invented, which meant Dorothea had planned this. Eliza was in the small sitting room with her book when she heard the door, and then voices, and then the silence that comes when the other person in the house has arranged to be absent. Dorothea sat down across from her. She was a woman who had spent 40 years doing what was necessary, which was different from doing what was right, and she wore this fact in her face the way some women wear their history, in the arrangement of the muscles around the mouth, in the set of the eyes. She was not a cruel woman, she was a practical one, which sometimes arrived at the same place. She folded her hands. She looked at Eliza. "I want you to understand," she said carefully, "that I am saying this because I care about you." Eliza placed her bookmark. "Then say it." Dorothea inhaled. "Men like Calloway, men of that position, they do not always marry the women they pay attention to. There are social calculations that we do not always see from outside them. You are a good girl, Eliza. You are sensible and you are kind. But you are not." She searched for the word, and Eliza could see her rejecting several before she settled. "You do not have what the world, at his level, considers shine," Eliza said. Dorothea blinked. "That was the word you were going to use," Eliza said, "or something near enough to it. I am not shiny enough for a duke." She said it without heat. It was a fact being located and named. You believe he is amusing himself. I believe men sometimes. You believe he will eventually select someone more suitable, and that I will be left in a considerably worse position than I am in now, because I will have been publicly noticed, and then publicly not chosen, and that is a particular kind of exposure that women at my station do not recover from easily. She looked at Dorothea steadily. Is that the substance of what you wanted to say? Dorothea was quiet for a long moment. You are very direct. I am saving us time. And knowing all of that, Dorothea said slowly, you will still see him on Thursday. Yes, Eliza said. Dorothea stood. She looked at her niece with an expression that was not quite pity, and not quite respect, and occupied some complicated territory between them. You are less sensible than I believed, she said. Or differently sensible, Eliza said. After she left, Eliza sat with the closed book in her lap, and let the room be quiet for a while. She was not naive. She had heard every word Dorothea said, and she had examined each one already in her own mind, in the small hours, in the kitchen with her too-hot tea, in the quiet spaces she had always used for the arithmetic of her own life. The possibility was real, she knew it. A man of his position, his options, his obligations, there were 100 reasons the road she could see herself beginning to walk might simply stop, might simply end, in a polite letter, or in silence, or in the particular social theater of a public attachment to someone with more shine. She knew this. She also knew something else. She knew what it felt like to not be looked at. She had lived in that condition for long enough that she had made it into a kind of home, a careful, tidy, adequately lit home, in which she had arranged her expectations around its dimensions. He had looked, not briefly, not performatively, not in the sideways way of a man who is looking at what is beside you instead of at you. He had sat down beside her in a row of chairs and asked about a piece of music and listened to her answer with the full machinery of his attention. He had asked twice for her at the musicale. She thought about that, just that. She was not 17 anymore. She was 23, and she had been sensible for 6 years, and she had done it very well, and it had given her a good quiet life that was reliable and small and did not move. She turned her book over in her hands. She had spent her whole reading life loving the parts of books where the character did the brave thing. She had never asked herself whether she believed she was the character or the reader. Thursday was tomorrow. She went to bed without making the list. She did not see it coming. That was the thing she would think about later, in the flat, clear light of the morning after, sitting in the kitchen that had become her thinking place. She had been so prepared for 100 different kinds of loss that she had not truly, prepared for the other thing. Calloway arrived at the usual time. He was shown in. He had brought a book. It was a small volume of letters, published correspondence between a Victorian diplomat and his wife, which he set on the table between them without ceremony and said, the third letter from the left side. Page 41. Tell me what you think of the husband. She read the letter. He waited, without performing the waiting, simply existing in the room alongside the silence. He is afraid, she said finally. Everyone else I have shown it to says he is arrogant, Calloway said. He is afraid of the exact same things I would be afraid of, she said, and he has dressed the fear in arrogance, because it was more available to him. She looked up. That is not the same as being arrogant. He was looking at her with that quality of attention she had begun to recognize and still could not entirely absorb. Why do you show people letters and ask them what they think, she said. Because the answer tells me something about them that they would never tell me themselves. And what does my answer tell you? He was quiet for a moment, then, that you understand afraid. The room was very still. She thought about 7 different things to say, and she said none of them. I want to ask you something, he said. Yes. He did not arrange himself. He did not produce a ring. He was just a man in a chair, turned slightly toward her, with the complete seriousness of someone who has thought about a thing for a long time, and has finally decided to say it out loud. I would like to marry you, he said, if you would have me. And I want you to understand before you answer, that I am not asking out of novelty, or interest, or any of the other words people might assign to the last 4 weeks. I am asking because in 4 weeks of talking to you I have found more. He paused, looking for the exact word, and she loved him a little for that, for the pause, for the care he took with words. More recognition than I have found in 11 years of rooms full of people. She looked at her hands. She thought about the list she had not made, the list of reasons, the arithmetic of her small, careful life. She thought about Dorothea sitting across from her with her folded hands. She thought about the carriage the night of the Pemberton ball, and the blue dress, and the laugh. Send the plain one away. She thought about a window in a room that had been closed for a long time. She looked up. Yes, she said. Not because it was the reasonable thing. It was not the reasonable thing. The Dorothea would say so clearly and at length in approximately 6 hours. Not because she was certain of how it would go, because she was not certain, and she had stopped pretending that certainty was available to people who were paying attention. Because he had looked, and he had looked again. And he had brought a book about a diplomat's letters and asked her to read between the lines of someone else's fear, and she had done it, and he had said, "That is what I thought too." Because she was 23 years old and she had been invisible for 6 years, and she was tired of being comfortable in the dark. "Yes," she said again, and her voice was steady. He did not kiss her hand or make a speech. He simply looked at her for a long moment with an expression she did not have the vocabulary for yet, and then he said, "Thursday was a good day to ask." "It is my best day," she said, without knowing why. They sat in the room together with the thing that had just happened settling around them like dust after a door has been opened. The news went through London in the way these things went, which was to say rapidly, and with significant embellishment. Within a week, the story had acquired details that no one who had been present could verify. Dorothea sat Eliza down the following morning and was genuinely frightened on her behalf, which was, Eliza thought, the most honest thing she had ever said without saying it. "You are certain," Dorothea said. "Yes. You understand what you are agreeing to." "I understand it more than I understand most things," Eliza said. Dorothea looked at her for a long moment. "He is a good man," she said finally, and the sentence cost her something. Eliza could see it costing her. "I did not say that before because I was afraid you would be hurt. I am saying it now because it appears that is no longer the primary concern." "No," Eliza said. "It appears not." She thought about Calloway saying, "I suspect not," understanding without being told. Cecily came to find her that afternoon. She was wearing the yellow dress, which was her thinking dress, the one she put on when she needed to feel like herself. She sat down on the edge of Eliza's bed and was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I am glad for you." Eliza looked at her. "I know that is perhaps strange to hear," Cecily said. "Given everything, I know I am not always—" She paused. "I am not always paying attention to the ways I say things, or the ways I laugh at things. I know that." She folded her hands in her lap, which was the only gesture Eliza had ever seen her share with her mother. "But I am genuinely glad for you, Eliza. I mean that." Eliza looked at her for a long moment. Cecily's face was open and clear and young, the face of a woman who moved through the world with such ease that she rarely had occasion to examine the wake she left in it. "Thank you," Eliza said, and she meant it. Cecily nodded once, precisely, and left. 6 weeks later, the arrangements were made and the date was set. Eliza's father came up from the country and stood in Calloway's library with his hat in his hands and the expression of a man who has been handed more than he expected and is doing his best to receive it with dignity. Calloway talked to him for 2 hours about land and tenant arrangements and the small property in Norfolk that bordered on the Ashworth estate and needed new fencing. He was entirely practical about all of it. He did not perform generosity. He was simply organized and direct and took the situation seriously in the specific way he took all situations seriously, which was with his full attention. Her father came to find her afterward and said, "He asked me what books you had borrowed from my library." Eliza stared. "Why?" "He said he wanted to know what you had read in my collection, so he could avoid duplicating it in his own." Her father looked at her with an expression that she had not seen on his face in a very long time. "He has a considerable library." She thought about a diplomat's letters on page 41. She thought about the chandelier. The wedding was on a morning in October when the light came in sideways and turned everything a particular shade of gold that had no good name in English. She wore ivory. She carried nothing that cost too much. She walked into the church on her father's arm and felt, for the first time she could remember, the precise opposite of invisible. Not because of the people in the pews, though there were many, and not because of the dress, though it was the most beautiful thing she had ever worn. Because at the end of the aisle he was watching her walk toward him with the expression she had still not found a vocabulary for, and she understood now that the vocabulary was not the point. Some things did not require naming. They required only the willingness to walk toward them. She did. After that, life arranged itself differently. Not in a way that was without difficulty. She was learning the dimensions of a new existence that was larger and louder and more demanding than the small one she had built for herself. There were people who required things of her, people who watched her, People who were still deciding whether to accept her in the place she had arrived in. She was learning the geography of a house that had 27 more rooms than any house she had ever known. She made mistakes, and she corrected them, and she moved on. She made herself ask for help when she needed it. That was harder than anything else. Calloway watched her do it all with that same quality of attention, which she had come to understand was not observation, but something closer to accompaniment. He was present in rooms with her the way a good conversation is present, not filling the space but making it feel worth being in. In November they attended a ball. It was not unlike the Pemberton Ball in its arrangement. The same geometry of people and light and expectation, the same warm density of candles, the same low surf of conversation, the same groups orbiting their various centers of gravity. She was a duchess now. People came to her. She received them correctly. She said the right things. She kept one part of her mind engaged in the machinery of the evening, and one part entirely elsewhere, the way she had always done, the private division of herself into the part that managed and the part that simply lived. Near the edge of the room, sometime after 10 o'clock, she noticed a girl standing by herself near one of the tall windows. She was perhaps 20, brown hair, simply dressed. She was not waiting to be asked to dance. She was looking at the chandelier. Eliza stood very still for a moment. The girl's lips were moving, barely, just the small motions of a person keeping count. Eliza did not cross the room. She did not say anything. She simply watched, from her place, as the girl went on counting, her face entirely private, entirely interior. A person making something exact out of a room that was too large. Eliza looked at the chandelier. 31, she thought. She was on 31. Calloway appeared at her elbow. "You have gone somewhere," he said quietly. "I am here," she said. "I am exactly here." She looked once more at the girl by the window. Then she looked at her husband. She thought about the first night. The candles. The cold room inside herself that she had walked through for 6 years. The window that had opened. She thought about the arithmetic of small lives, and how sometimes the numbers change. She had been sent away, in a laugh, on a Tuesday night in May. She had stayed anyway. She had counted. And someone had crossed the room to ask her what number she was on. Not because she was bright enough, not despite anything, but because she was the only person in a room full of performance who was doing something real, and he had been looking for something real for a very long time, and so had she. 31. She hoped the girl was on 31. She hoped someone was watching.